Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin, Daf Kuf Bet. We're going to get started from the bottom of Kuf Aleph Amud Bet. So we had a braita, and we started with this, where we said, Ever Tana Rabbanan, Ever Menachai Noheg Bebeima Chayav Of. So, Ever Menachai, eating a part of a limb of a live animal, is forbidden in animals, domesticated, undomesticated, and birds. Bein Tmeim, Bein Tolim, whether they're kosher, whether they're not kosher. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda of Rabbi Elazar. So that's Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar's position. The rabbis disagree, and they said only in kosher animals. Rabbi Yochanan said they both actually learned it from the same verse. This is from Devarim, chapter 12, verse 23. Don't eat blood, because blood is the soul. And then it says, don't eat the soul with the meat, to which they explain, soul with the meat means Ever Menachai. Now, how do we get to this disagreement then, whether this applies to kosher or non-kosher animals? Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar Savle, they hold, Kol she'ata mitzuveh al damo, ata mitzuveh al ivarav. If, since blood and Ever Menachai appear in the same pasuk, if you're commanded about blood, which is, in other words, if on this meat there's a commandment not to eat the blood, which is any non-kosher animal as well as kosher animals, then you're mitzuvah lebarav, then you're also forbidden to eat a limb from a live animal. Right? So if we apply this principle that wherever a prohibition of blood applies, and the prohibition of eating a limb applies, so since you're non-kosher animals and birds and domesticated and non-domesticated, you're commanded not to eat the blood, so also you're commanded not to eat their limbs. For Rabbanan Savre, and the rabbis hold, Lo tochala nefesh ima basal. Let's pay careful attention, and we saw this already yesterday with a different pasuk about the Gid and Asher. Don't eat the soul with the meat. Ela basar lechude. What can you eat? Don't eat the soul with the meat, but eat the meat without the soul. Now, what does this teach you? Well, kol shebasar mutal. If you can eat the meat, then atam mitzuvah levarav. Then you're not allowed to eat the live meat, the limb when the animal's alive. But if you can't eat the meat, then this verse isn't referring to you. Meaning, right, if you can't eat the meat because the meat's not kosher, then there's no extra commandment on the limb specifically. So that's why this pasuk, just like we said about the Gid and Asher pasuk, don't eat the Gid, but obviously in a case where you can eat the meat. So in a case where you can eat the meat, don't eat the limb taken from a live animal. Rabbi Yehuda, now they're going to ask a question. So basically, they each define the pasuk. One thinks the pasuk is definitely referring to even non-kosher animals because of the blood, and the other thinks it's definitely not referring to non-kosher animals because it's only on meat that you can actually eat. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute, Rabbi Yehuda lama lecha. Okay, but why do we need a pasuk for Rabbi Yehuda? We know already what Rabbi Yehuda is going to say about this based on what we saw in the previous sugya. Leiti Easter Aver, lichol halister tumor, right? This is back in our Mishnah. We should have the prohibition of not eating a limb from a live animal should apply to the prohibition on non-kosher food. Why? Shekain, right, non-kosher animals. Shekain itzuro noheg b'nei Noach. Another similarity between Gid and Asher and Ever Menachai is that, right, if you hold Gid and Asher as b'nei Noach, but Ever Menachai, everybody has it on their list of mitzvot b'nei Noach, that they can't eat a limb from a live animal either. So if they can't eat a limb from a live animal, then again, first we have the prohibition, don't eat non-kosher meat. Then we take out a limb from this non-kosher animal. And that second prohibition applies because it's a more severe prohibition, because it's noheg b'ben noach. It applies, right, to more people, right? And because of that, it's more severe, because even non-Jews have to keep it. So wouldn't you say that would be the reason for Rabbi Yehuda? Why does he need this pasuk? Now remember, I'm just going back to what we did. We had braita with the machloket. Rabbi Yochanan said, both sides of this machloket learn it from the same verse. To which the Gemara says, in Achinami, you're right. The pasuk was really only for Rabbi Elazar. Remember, there's two people who hold that position. There's Rabbi Yehuda and there's Rabbi Elazar. So now we're going to say that pasuk was needed for Rabbi Elazar and not really for Rabbi Yehuda. For Rabbi Yehuda, you don't even need a pasuk. And now we're going to bring a braita to support. I want you to think already about what this braita is supporting. Tanya nami hachi. Ever menachai noheg b'behema chayav ha'of bein tme'ah bein to'ah. So ever menachai, this taking a limb from a live animal, is for domesticated, non-domesticated birds also, right? Non-domesticated, domesticated animals and birds, whether they're kosher, whether they're not kosher, shene'emal, based on the pasuk, rak chazak lebilti yachol adam, kol she'atam mitzuvet al damo, tam mitzuvet levarav. You can see why this is proving. It's going back to what Rabbi Yochanan said and saying exactly the same thing, that it comes from the pasuk about the blood, right? Besides giving the approach, right? Who says what, which the Braita had already said, but Rabbi Yochanan connected it with the verses, and that's what this Braita says, as opposed to Rabbi Yochanan's and right here's support from a Tanaitic source. So if you're commanded on dam, kol she'atam mitzuvel damo, like kosher, kosher and non-kosher, atam mitzuvel levarav. Right? This pasuk applies in any case where you're commanded not to eat the blood, which would include non-kosher animals. It's only in kosher animals. Right? So don't eat the nefesh. The only thing you should eat, don't eat the soul, don't eat a piece of a limb from a live animal, but eat the meat itself, meaning if the meat is permitted in a kosher animal, then you're commanded not to eat a limb from it. But if the meat is not permitted, then you're not commanded. So that was basically, sounds very simple, a proof for Rabbi Yochanan. However, you might have noticed something, you might not have picked up on it. But if you notice in this Braita who's missing, Rabbi Yehuda. So while Rashi says that this is coming to prove Rabbi Yochanan, that each of the opinions, Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yehuda on one hand, against the rabbis on the other, where did they get the proof from the pasuk? This proves Rabbi Yochanan. However, Rabbeinu Gershom, who you can find on the side, we're going to see two commentaries of his today, says here that what's the proof? And I actually thought about this as I was learning. This is a proof for what we just said a minute ago, which is that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't need the pasuk to prove it because he already has his theory about the B'nai Noach, and once that adds, it's Isur Chal Isur in a case where there's an Isur Chamor, where there's a more stringent prohibition. And this Braita proves that because notice he's missing here. The proof from the verse is brought only in the name of Rabbi Elazar, which explains because Rabbi Yehuda has his own proof and doesn't need the verse. So when Rabbi Yochanan said that this is the proof for that opinion of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yehuda, he really just meant Rabbi Elazar because Rabbi Yehuda really didn't need a verse for, and that's proven by the Braita. So there's two ways to read what this Braita is proving. Now we're going to get to a third opinion. We have one opinion, Ever Menachai doesn't apply to non-kosher animals, and one opinion that it does apply to non-kosher animals. But both of them thought that it applies for domesticated, non-domesticated animals, and birds. Comes Rabbi Meir and disagrees with that point. Rabbi Meir omer, Eino noheg ela bebehema tahora bilvad. It's only in kosher behemot, kosher domesticated animals. That's it. So he agrees with Chachamim that's only kosher, but he disagrees with Chachamim and with Rabbi Yehuda that he doesn't even think it applies to undomesticated animals and birds. Amar Rabba Bar Shmuel, Amar Rav Chisda v'Itamar Rav Yosef. So Rabba Bar Shmuel says in the name of Rav Chisda, or maybe in the name of Rav Yosef. But Amrilan, some people say Amar Rabba Bar Shila, Amar Rav Chisda v'Itamar Rav Yosef. That it was Rabba Bar Shila who said it either in the name of Rav Chisda or in the name of Rav Yosef. There Amrilan, the third possibility about who said it, Rabba Bar Shimi, Amar Rav Chisda. It was not Rabba Bar Shila, it was Rabba Bar Shimi who said in the name of Rav Chisda v'Itamar Rav Yosef, or maybe in the name of Rav Yosef. So one of these three people said it in the name of either Rav Chisda or Rav Yosef. And now let's finally get to what they said. My Talmud Rabbi Meir, what's his reason? Amar Kra, v'zavachta mibcharcha umitzoncha. This is a pasuk, two psukim before our pasuk about the blood and the nefesh and all about not eating the soul, meaning a live limb, right? A limb from a live animal. Well, two psukim before it says, when you get into the land and it's far from you to get to the temple and you want to eat meat, right? It says, v'zavachta mibcharcha umitzoncha. Okay, and you slaughter from your cattle and your sheep. What do you see here? That's only domesticated animals. And then it says, don't eat the blood and don't eat the soul. Okay, there you have it. That's where you learn. And because the context of all that is just talking about domesticated animals, the prohibition is only on domesticated animals. So that's a third opinion. Okay. The next two sections of the Gemara are going to be talking about two different statements made by Rav. The first statement, he's going to have a statement. We're going to have two proofs for the statement from Talmudic sources. Then we're going to have another statement of Rav, and we're going to have three difficulties on it from Talmudic sources. And each of the difficulties we're going to resolve in the same manner. So let's start. Amarav Gidal Amarav. Machloket b'Yisrael. This whole machloket that we talked about between Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yehuda on the one hand, Chachamim on the other, and Rabbi Meir on the third, is only b'Yisrael, is only talking about Jews and Ever Menachai of Jews. As opposed to, you already learned that B'nai Noach are commanded. Aval b'ben Noach, but if you're talking about a ben Noach, and it's a non-Jew, divrei hakol muzhar l'tzmeim k'teorim. Of course, non-Jews, everybody thinks, is commanded not to eat a limb from a live animal of even a non-kosher animal, which makes perfect sense, because we're going to say, don't eat a limb from a live animal of, only certain animals that you eat, right? You eat all non-kosher. So if you're going to eat all non-kosher, then even in those animals, you can't take a limb from a live animal. So now we're going to start with, like I told you, two sources to support this reading. Tanya Nami Hachi. Here we have a braita to support. Ever Menachai ben Noach muzhar alav al atzmeim k'tehorim. So here you have it explicitly. A ben Noach is obligated for kosher and non-kosher animals. The Yisraeli no muzhar el al torim b'vav. But Jews are only warned not to eat the Ever Menachai of kosher animals. That would be the rabbi's opinion. Although Ikad Amri Torah v'Rabbi Meir, Ikad Amri Torim v'Rabbanan. Now there's a debate here about what the version of what the text reads. Does it say Jews are commanded only on tehorim, plural, or tehorah, singular? Torah, singular, and feminine would be, Torah would be only applying to behemot, animals, which is feminine. The word in Hebrew is feminine. So tehorah would be, according to Rabbi Meir, who says it's only domesticated animals. If it's tehorim, plural, then it's referring to animals, domesticated, non-domesticated, and birds. Okay, so either which way, it's either Chachamim or Rabbi Meir, but the point being that if you're talking about those who say it's only kosher, you see this distinction, that when it comes to non-Jews, they think they're even commanded not to eat Ever Menachai from kosher, and that was from non-kosher animals, and that was the first line of the braita. And comes Rav Shizbi, Amar Rav Shizbi, Af Ananami Tanina. We also have a braita to support. It's actually a Mishnah. It's a Mishnah in Masechet Tarot in the very beginning, chapter 1, Mishnah 3. It lists, first of all, the case before it's listing all these impurities. It starts with Nevelat Of Tameh, the case before, which is a carcass of a dead bird, a non-kosher bird, okay? And then it moves to Achal Ever Menachai Mimena. So Mimena, from it, is referring back to the previous case of the dead carcass of a non-kosher bird. And it says if you eat an Ever Menachai from it, meaning you eat an Ever Menachai of a non-kosher bird, Eino Sofeg Arba'im, you don't get 40 lashes. Okay, that we assume is talking about Jews don't get 40 lashes for doing it because it's not kosher meat. Okay, this seems to match the rabbi's position. Ve'en shchita metarta. And if you were to slaughter it, that wouldn't help it any. Okay, this is a bit of a strange line. We're going to have to figure out what this is. B'mai. Okay, what's this referring to? What's this Mishnah talking about? And to who is it referring? Okay, if it's you're talking about a Jew, and we say it's a non-kosher bird that, you took a limb off, right? And if you slaughter it, that's not going to help. Well, even if you don't slaughter it, it's not going to help. It's not kosher. So what does that mean? It must be referring to non-Jews. And michlal de asur. What do you get from here now? Okay, what they're assuming is achal ever menachai. If you eat ever menachai, then you're going to eno sofegat arba'im, right? If you eat from a non-kosher bird, if you're a Jew, you're not going to get lashes. But if you're a non-Jew, and that's the next line, ein shchita mitaharta. What does this mean, ein shchita mitaharta? What they mean to say is, if you're a non-Jew and you're slaughtering this non-kosher bird, and you finish the shchita, you've done, well, in a bird, it's one siman, but the bird is still flailing. If you're a Jew and you do it for a kosher animal, as soon as you finish the shchita, the bird, animal or whatever it is permitted to eat immediately because the shchita basically permits it. Shchita is the permitter. But if you're a non-Jew and shchita is not a permitter, then you have to wait till the animal stops, or in this case, it's a bird, stops flailing. If the animal is still flailing, it's not the shechita that permits the animal to be eaten, because shechita isn't a thing for non-Jews. So the shechita is not sufficient. You have to wait till the animal is completely dead and stops their, any kind of movement till it really shows signs of complete death, and then you can eat it. And that second line is referring to non-Jews. Okay, anyway, what do you see here? Right? Michlal de asu. Then you get that an Ever Menachai is forbidden to them, because Ein Shchita Matarta basically means you have to wait till the animal's completely dead. You can't take a limb from there if the animal's still alive. So there you see, Ever Menachai is applicable also in an Of Tameh, a non-kosher bird, as what was the topic there, for non-Jews. Rabbi Mani Bar Patish, now this is going to really come to the exact same conclusion about how to read that Mishnah, but we're just going to hear it come about in a bit of a different way. Rabbi Mani Bar Patish looked at that Mishnah and said, Rami Reisha Seifa. He said the Reisha seems to contradict the Seifa. The Reisha says you're not going to get lashes for this, right? And we're talking about a non-kosher bird, right? And the Seifa seems to say the Shechita makes it permitted. What are we talking about? To which he answers, Mishani Reisha b'Yisrael v'Seifa ben Noach. Okay, so explains just as we said before. The Reisha is talking about a Jew, and the Seifa is talking about a non-Jew, and then they're talking about two completely separate things, and that's how to make it make sense, and that's basically just saying in different words what we said just before. So that was the first statement of Rav. Again, just to review, we had the Machloket, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar, versus the rabbis. Does it apply to kosher or non-kosher meat as well? The Ever Menachai. We have Rabbi Meir who adds, or narrows, it's only for kosher and only for animals. Okay, there's no Ever Menachai in undomesticated animals and in birds, just domesticated animals. Then Rav came along and said, for non-Jew though, it's obvious that they can't eat Ever Menachai from non-kosher animals, and obviously kosher animals. And we proved it from two Tannaitic sources, right? The second one being a Mishnah, the first one being a Braita. Okay, now we're going to move on to the second statement of Rav. Amar Rav, Ever Menachai tzarich kizayid. This is the one that's going to take us a little bit longer to get through, because we're going to have three challenges to this statement. In order to be liable for Ever Menachai, you need to eat an olive bulk of the limb. Okay. My time, well, what's the reason? Because it says don't eat the nefesh im basal. It's an isur achila. Isur achila is always kazayit. Sounds like a very simple, obvious statement. However, we're going to have three difficulties, as I told you. Mativ Rav Amram. So Rav Amram brings the source to contradict the source we just read for the Mishnah in Taharot. Achal ever menachai mimena eino sofeget arba'im ve'ein shchita mitarata. So you're not going to get lashes by eating ever menachai of a non-kosher bird. That's going to be the key line. The second part is not so important, the ein shchita mitarata, for our purposes. Isal kadatach be'inan kazayit. Now, if you think you need kazayit to transgress ever menachai, and what this is saying, well, if you ate a kazayit of ever menachai of a non-kosher animal, well, you won't get lashes for that. But if you ate a kazayit of a non-kosher animal, of course you're going to get lashes. Why are you going to get lashes? Maybe not for ever menachai, but you're going to get lashes because you ate a non-kosher animal. So the Gemara says, right, if you're going to think that you need a kazayit, and what this is saying is, even if you ate a kazayit, there's no ever menachai in this case because it was a non-kosher and it just doesn't apply there. Well, tipukla de ka'achel kazayit. You should be getting lashes here because you ate a kazayit of meat that wasn't kosher. So it must be that it's wrong what Rav said, and that really for eating ever menachai, it's less than an olive bulk, less than a kazayit, which means that if you ate less than an olive bulk, you really won't get lashes. Not from ever menachai because it was a non-kosher bird, and not for eating non-kosher because you didn't eat a shiur, a kazayit, that would obligate. So to which the Gemara answers, and this is going to be the answer in all three cases that we're going to have, just like Kid'amar Rav Nachman b'mashu basal v'gidim ba'atzamot, just like Rav Nachman said elsewhere, which is going to be the third difficulty of today, just like Rav Nachman answered there, which we haven't seen yet, but he said we're talking about a little bit of meat, and the rest of the olive bulk that we're talking about here that must have been there is made up of bones and sinews. Now, when you're obligated for eating non-kosher meat, you need a kazayit of the meat itself, not the parts that aren't really food, okay? But in ever menachai, you're going to be liable if you eat a kazayit, and this is what Rav said. Rav said a kazayit, what do you need an olive bulk of? Of the limb. The limb, eating the limb will include not just the meat, also the bones, also the sinews. So if altogether of all those three, you have a kazayit, then if it's from a non-kosher animal or bird, then you're not going to be obligated for Ever Minachai, and you won't even be obligated for non-kosher because you don't actually have an olive bulk of meat. All you have is an olive bulk of everything, right? Everything together. But you're not obligated for those things in a non-kosher animal. Okay, so just like he says it somewhere else, he brings this as the answer. Likewise, here, hachanami, we can say the same thing here. B'mashu basal, a little bit of meat, and gidim and atzamot, and sinews and bones. Okay, tashma, second difficulty. Da'amarav, achal tzipor tahora, b'chayeha b'kol shehu, b'mitata b'kazayim. If you eat a bird, that's a kosher bird, if you eat it when it's alive, any small amount, this is the key problem, any small amount you'll be obligated. B'chayeha, if it's alive, in Ever Minachai, you take a part of it, right? You're going to be liable. B'mitata, if it dies, b'kazayit. Only if you ate an olive bulk, if it's dead. Okay? Now, again, the key being here, when it's alive, any amount is a problem. That sounds like Ever Minachai is a problem. Now, in any case, we're going to continue, even though this line isn't important, although it does come up a second time in our daf later. Utme'ah, if it's a non-kosher animal, bein b'chayeha, bein b'mitata b'kolshu. If you eat this, it's actually a bird here. If you eat this non-kosher bird and you eat the whole thing, whether it's alive or whether it's dead, it doesn't matter, b'kolshu. Any amount you eat, you're going to be liable, and this is for a different reason. This is because it's a complete creature. You ate a complete bird, even if it's teeny and it's less than an olive bulk. Okay, I have to try to imagine what bird that would be, but that would be a complete olive bulk. You're going to be obligated. Anyway, back to the line that's bothering us, which is b'chaya b'kolshu, and that goes against Rav because if it was Ever Minachai, it should be only if you eat a kazayit. To which again they're going to answer hachanami also here b'mashu basal gidim atzamot. A little bit of meat, but the gidim and the atzamot, the sinews and the bones, fill it up to be a kazayit, and that's what we mean mashu, any amount of meat. But as long as you have enough of an aver, of a limb, to be a kazayit, an olive bulk. And that's how we explain the difficulty on Rav, as we're going to do with the third one as well. Tashma. Here's our third source. Natal tzipor she'en bo kazayit v'achalo. You took a bird that didn't have a kazayit. It was a very small bird. The whole thing wasn't even a kazayit, and you ate it. Rebbe poter. Rebbe says you're not obligated. For Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon mechayev. And Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon obligates you. Now, Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Now we have to explain, okay? Now, we're talking about you ate the bird without killing it. So it was a live bird. We don't yet understand the difficulty, but we don't understand the difficulty. We don't yet understand the opinions, but we'll get there right now. So Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, he continues and he says, Kavachomer. This, by the way, is in a Tosefta. Al ever mimena chayav, al kula lo koshakin. If you eat a whole complete bird that's alive, of course you're going to be liable for Ever Minachai, because if you would eat parts of it, obviously you'd be obligated. So if you eat the whole thing, you're going to be obligated. Okay? Like if you ate a limb from it, you'd be obligated. So of course, if you eat the whole thing, you're going to be obligated. Chanka ve'achla, if you strangled it and then ate it, so it was a nevela, divrei al-kol b'kazayit. Well, because it's a nevela, because you killed it in some other way other than slaughtering, everyone agrees you need an olive bulk because the shiur for a nevela is an olive bulk. Okay, now, we haven't gotten to the difficulty yet, although it might be kind of obvious already. Remember, we're talking about a bird that doesn't even have a kazayit, and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon obligates. The rabbis don't, but let's see what their source of contention is. Umar savar b'chayeha lav le'evarim omedet. Okay, one says when it's alive, it's viewed as, this is like saying the whole is the sum of its parts. While it's alive, you could have theoretically taken evarim out of it. So because, right, you could have separated limbs and eaten them. So because you eat the whole thing live, we're basically saying you obviously ate aver, right? It's like eating the limbs separately. So you basically ate limbs from a live animal because the whole is the sum of its parts. And that's Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. The rabbis say, Mar savar, b'chayeha lav le'evarim omedet. No, when it's alive, it's not like it's viewed as separate parts. You weren't really planning to eat them as separate parts. So when you ate the whole thing, you ate the whole thing. That's not ever minachai. We don't view the whole as the sum of its parts. But anyway, the point being, for our purposes, but everybody thinks you don't need a kazayit. Nobody thinks you need a kazayit. The issue is just, are you obligated because we view this as like you ate a bunch of limbs, or do you view this as, no, you ate a whole thing, not limbs? So Anyway, they all seem to say there's no problem of kazayit, right? There's no need for kazayit. And Rav said you need a kazayit to be obligated. So I'm Rav Nachman. Here's where Rav Nachman said it. And the other two, we quoted it from here. B'mashu basal gidi batzamo. It's where you have a mashu of basal, a little bit of basal, but right, the bird had a little bit of meat, not even an olive bulk, and together with the gidim and the atzamot, the sinews and the bones, it made up a kazayit. So when it says Sipor She'en Bo Kazayit, it meant it doesn't have a kazayit of meat, but it does have a kazayit of everything else together. This, by the way, already seems more realistic for a bird, that you could have a bird that's less than an olive bulk because the meat itself is less than an olive bulk, but everything else put together is. Okay, and that we resolve the third difficulty, but we're not finished yet with this third one because the Gemara says, "Mi kamidi de bekule late le basar kazayit basar ubachad ever eat le kazayit b'mashu basar gidim b'atzamot." Wait a minute, does it make any sense to have a bird? Even though I said a minute ago maybe it does, but that there's not even an olive bulk of the entire bird of meat, but yet the bones and the sinews make up an olive bulk together with the meat. Seems like the ratio should be more meat to bones in general. To which Amar Rav Shrevya in Biklanita said, oh yeah, there's this bird called the Klanita, which actually has very big bones. It's very lean, so very little meat. And yeah, that would be a case where you don't even have an olive bulk of meat, but together with the bones and sinews, you do. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, you're talking about a Klanita. Well, we're going to see now that a Klanita is not kosher. If it's a non-kosher bird, and the Bright is talking about the Tosefta is talking about a Klanita, then in a Seifa, look at the last line in the Tosefta. If you strangle it and eat it, everyone agrees it's an olive bulk. Now, ha-klanita of tamehu. Now, if the klanita is an of tameh, then you wouldn't need, if the klanita is a non-kosher bird, then it wouldn't, first of all, it would be a problem. Chankava achla would be a problem. Before even strangling it, it would be forbidden, right? And this seems to be an issue of it being a nevela. Okay, so if we're going to say that, just one second. Right. Now remember, we're going back to the fact that if the whole bird is less than a kazayit, why do you need a kazayit if you killed the whole bird, this klanita, and the whole bird has a kazayit in it, what did we say back to the beginning of the daf? Rav had said, because it's a bria. It's a creature. It's a whole bird. You ate a whole bird. You wouldn't need a kazayit, actually. So, right, klanita of tameu, it's a non-kosher bird, and you'd be obligated for eating the whole bird, for eating not kosher. And then you wouldn't even need a kazayit to be obligated. So, I'm a Rav. So how do we explain this? Oh, sorry, I didn't read that line. Right, that was the line I went back to it. And Rav said, I just didn't read this inside. I went back. I forgot the Gemara says it right here. And Rav said, so why would it be a kazayit if by eating the whole bird you're already obligated in a mashu? To which the Gemara answers, fine, they didn't really mean a klanita is the case that this Tosefta is talking about. Ela ke'en klanita. You asked this question and you said, what kind of bird has that? And I just gave you an example of a bird that has that. I didn't mean that's the one bird that Tosefta is talking about. But Tosefta is saying about kosher birds, but kosher birds that have a structure similar to a klanita, just we came up with the klanita, there must be some other kosher bird that has that same ratio of very little meat, lots of big bones, that you could have a kazayit of bones without having a kazayit of meat. Okay, so that was the end of the third difficulty on Rav saying that an Ever Menachai needs to have a kazayit in order for you to be obligated. You need to eat a kazayit of it. We brought all these sources that seem to say you don't need a kazayit. Every time we said, no. That just means you need a kazayit of the limb with everything together, the meat, the bones, and the sinews, even though there's not a kazayit actually of meat. I'm a Rav. Now Rava goes into, since we brought up in this third difficulty against Rav, we brought up this machloka between Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi about a bird that doesn't even have a kazayit in it, and you eat it. Okay, do we view the whole as some of its parts or not? To which Rava says, Im timtzalomer, sava Rebbe, machshevet ochlin shma machshava. If you want to say, this is a whole other issue, machshava, how much is your intent factor in? Okay, you might remember we've talked about this particularly in terms of laws of impurity, but it's relevant in all sorts of cases, even muktzah on Shabbat. If you designate something before Shabbat with your thoughts, and you say, I'm going to use this for something like rocks or muktzah completely, But if you designate those rocks to be used for something on Shabbat that's permitted, you can actually use them on Shabbat. Your intent changes things. Also for impurity. If you have something that's not yet considered a vessel, but then you decide to use it for something, that turns it into a vessel that now it becomes susceptible to impurity. So Rava says, if you want to say, he starts a kind of thinking, if you want to suggest that Savar Rebbe, Machshevet Ochlin, Shma Machshava, the Rebbe thinks that your intent when it comes to food is relevant, Chishev Lo'ochla Ever Ever, V'achala Kula Chayav. If you thought to eat this bird in parts, now remember, Rebbe says the sum is not a whole of its parts. We look at it as one thing. You ate the whole thing live. We don't say, oh, you intended to eat it in parts when it was alive, and therefore we view this as if you're eating Ever Min HaChai. No, this is one complete being. You were anyway, right? You weren't planning to eat it in parts. But what if a person said, me, I actually want to eat this in parts. And you thought about doing it in parts, but then you didn't. In the end, you ate the whole thing whole. So you'd be chayav because you showed that you are viewing this bird as in parts. And then by eating the whole thing, you actually ate ever, lim, and you're obligated for ever min HaChai. So that's Rav. Comes Abaye, and Abaye completely disagrees. Amalei Abaye says, how can you say intent factors in here? Umi kamidi di'ilu achile achel lo mechayev, achile hai mechayev. This doesn't make any sense. If I decide I'm going to eat it in parts, but you did it, and you're just with the regular people who don't usually eat this in parts, and therefore we view the whole thing as a whole as regards to you. If you would eat this whole, you wouldn't be obligated for Ever Min HaChai. But if I eat it because of my thoughts, now if I eat it, the same bird, I eat it, I'm obligated? That sounds crazy. So he doesn't agree with Rava, but Rava doesn't seem to have a problem, right? Amar Le, Rava says, Ze lefi machshavto, v'ze lefi machshavto. Rava says, each one according to their thoughts. In other words, yeah, I have no problem with that. If I think it's going to be in parts, then I'm obligated Ever Min HaChai. You didn't, so you're not. And comes Rava and he continues, Amar Rava, Intim Talomer Savar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Machshevet Ochlin Shma Machshava. If you want to say that Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon also thinks Machshevet Ochlin Shma Machshava, that your intent is meaningful, in which case he's now going to have a flip case. Chishev lo achla meta va'achla chaya patul. If you thought to eat it when it was dead, and then you ate it when it was alive, you're exempt. Okay, why is that? So Rashi says, okay, this is a very hard thing to understand. Rashi gives one interpretation. We'll go to Rabbanit Gershom with a second. Rashi says if you intended to eat it dead, then gale date de b'chayeha lav le'evarim omed. You prove that you don't view this as parts in evarim because you weren't planning to take limb, right? Because you ate it, you wanted to eat it when it was dead. In the end, you ended up eating it when it was alive, and then it was like eating it in parts in ever min HaChai. It's a bit of a complicated explanation. The Rabbeinu Gershom gives something else. Obviously, he thought it was a complicated explanation. Chishev lo'achla meta. Like I told you, Rabbeinu Gershom's on the side of the page here. De'eno chayav ela b'kezayit. If you wanted to eat it when it was alive, when it was dead, well, dead means nevela, without slaughtering it. Then you'll be chayav only in a kezayit, because it's nevela. And then you ate it when it was alive, pachomi kazayit, okay, and you ate less than a kazayit, you'll be exempt. He takes it to a completely different place and says, if you intended to eat a nevela, then your requisite amount for being obligated, even when you ended up eating it when it was alive, is going to be at a kazayit and not at the lower amount of, right, whatever you eat, right, of let's say, even if it was the meat together with the bones and the sinews, that wouldn't apply because you're operating in the land of machshava where you intended to eat it as a nevela. So those laws kick in and you have to eat a kazayit. Okay. It's a little hard to understand either which interpretation you go with, but that's right. You see here, it was a little complicated. So anyway, again comes Abaye. Again, you're going to have a case where one person will eat it, he'll be obligated. The other person will eat it, he'll be exempt. That doesn't make any sense. Rabbi says, no, each one according to their machshava, yes. Intentionality is super important when it comes to halacha. And yes, it could be, we could both do the exact same action, but since my intent was different than your intent, it's going to be completely different. Okay, which by the way, applies also positive in mitzvot, right? You need intent. You could do the same action, but without intent. Again, not all mitzvot need kavanah, but certain ones do. And if you do it without intent, It's like you didn't do it at all. Again, most mitzvot don't need intent, and there's all sorts of sugyot about it, but it's an interesting thought. Okay, last sugyot for today. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Lo tochal nefesh ima basal. That's our pasuk we started with, and it's Rabbi Yochanan again who says this is the source for Ever Minachai, and the difference of opinion about does it apply to non-kosher or yes, only to kosher, but any which way, that's the source for Ze Ever Minachai. This is eating a limb from a live animal. Ubasal b'sadeh treifa lo tochelu. Now we bring a different pasuk. Meat in a field that's treifa, don't eat. Ze basar minachai. This is if you just cut off flesh from a live animal. That's also forbidden. Ubasar min treifa, and meat from a treifa. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish amal. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Rish Lakish, disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan and says lo tochal nefesh ima basar ze ever minachai. Basar minachai. He says, actually, both Ever minachai and basar minachai come from this idea of not eating the soul. When the animal's alive, don't take not a limb and not some meat from it. Ubasar b'sedeh treifa lo tochelu ze basar min treifa. Basar b'sedeh, that's only time about a treifa. So we now have three things that you agree about two. Basar b'sedeh treifa definitely is don't eat treifa meat, right? Treifa. We spent a lot of time on that. I don't need to explain that. Lo tochal nefesh ima basar definitely is a limb from a live animal, but the basar minachai fluctuates depending on which opinion. So now they're going to have some relevancies to this. Well, if two things are learned from the same pasuk and you transgress them both, you're only going to be liable one because it's one negative prohibition that you transgress. So this is going to have all sorts of ramifications. Achal ever minachai ubasar minachai. Let's say you ate both a limb and the flesh from a live animal. Rabbi Yochanan chayav shtayim, because he learns it from two different psukim. So you're going to be liable two, right? Two sets of lashes. The Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish eno chayav el echad. Okay, according to Rish Lakish, you're only obligated one because the basar minachai and the ever minachai come from the same pasuk. Achal basar minachai ubasar min treifa. If you ate flesh from a live animal and treif meat, the Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish chayav shtayim, because they're both learned from different psukim, whereas the Rabbi Yochanan eno chayav el echad because he learns them both from the same pasuk. And lastly, achal ever minachai ubasar min treifa. If you ate ever minachai and basar min treifa, which both agree come from two different psukim, l'divrei kol chayav shtayim. Obviously, according to everybody, you're going to be liable too. And with that, we finish our daf. Okay, we're going to start with the contradiction tomorrow. So, right, which is the last line, the last word in today's daf, uraminu. Okay, uraminu is we're bringing a contradiction. Anyway, what did we do today? We started with this machloket about whether Ever Minachai applies to kosher or non-kosher, kosher and non-kosher, or only kosher animals, and does it apply to animals, birds, and domesticated, non-domesticated animals, or only domesticated animals? That was Rabbi Meir. Then we went to two statements of Rav. One, that the whole machloket here about kosher, non-kosher is only for Jews. For non-Jews, everyone agrees it applies to non-kosher meat. We brought two proofs from Tanaitic sources. Then we went to Rav's statement about Ever Minachai requires a kazayit in order to be obligated, eating a kazayit, to which we brought three difficulties, but each time said, well, it does have a kazayit in all those cases. It just doesn't have a kazayit of meat. It does have a kazayit of the meat together with the sinews and with the bones. Then we went to, because the third one got off on this machloket, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi, about whether the whole is some of its parts or not. Do we view, if we eat a complete bird live, is it Ever Minachai or not? Rav says, well, if each of them takes into consideration intent, then theoretically each would have a case where the halacha would be different from what they said before. And Abai says, what are you talking about? You're going to have a different halacha for a different person who eats it, depending on their thoughts? And Rav says, yeah, I have no problem with that. And then we ended with this machloket, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, about which pasuk we learned, Ever Minachai, Basar Minachai, and Basar Treifa. And each of them had one pasuk which taught two things, which then had all sorts of ramifications. How many sets of lashes would be obligated if you do two of those transgressions? And with that, we finish for today, wishing everyone a good day.